one misplaced key, and a trail no detective could ignore. Welcome to Deadly Puzzle. I am your host, Edric Vale. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Your comments make this journey even more special to me. It had been raining. Since the night before, the kind of soft, steady drizzle that made Paris seem smaller, drawing the city inward under a low, grey sky. Maigret sat by the window of his office, the open casement letting in the faint scent of wet stone and the metallic tang from the river. He had taken off his overcoat, but left the scarf looped once loosely around his neck. His pipe lay unlit, beside a cold coffee cup, forgotten for the moment. On the far side of the street, a concierge leaned against the doorway of her lodge, her arms folded in that resigned posture of someone watching the day unfold without expecting it to change. She glanced up occasionally at the flow of umbrellas and damp overcoats, her eyes narrowing at nothing in particular. Maigret liked such faces. They told you more about a neighborhood than a week's worth of reports. He had no pressing case. Today, there were papers on his desk, letters to initial, statements to read, but they could wait. His mind was not on work. Last night after dinner, his wife had asked him, almost casually, if he remembered the last time they had gone out together, without it being for someone's birthday or a police banquet. He had smiled, made a vague remark, but the question had stayed with him like a pebble in his shoe. The telephone rang once, then stopped. Janvier's voice murmured in the corridor, the low rise and fall of someone explaining something he wasn't sure mattered yet. Maigret heard footsteps, then the familiar knock, soft, respectful, as if reluctant to interrupt his thoughts. "Come in," he said. Janvier pushed the door open. He looked damp, his hat pushed back on his head, coat collar up. "It's nothing urgent, Chief," he began, "but there's something odd." Maigret raised an eyebrow. Odd was the sort of word that could mean anything from a missing wallet to a body in the canal. "There's a building on Rue des Trois Frères," Janvier went on. "An early delivery man found a key in a door this morning. Not the tenant's key, wrong shape, wrong type, and the door wasn't properly closed. The concierge says no one left during the night, but the tenant, a widow, about 50, swears she locked up before bed." Maigret tapped the stem of his pipe against the desk. "And she's upset. Nothing seems to be missing, but she's certain someone was inside. It's probably nothing, but—" Janvier hesitated, and in that hesitation Maigret caught the faint unspoken note, "But it doesn't feel right." He stood, slowly pulling on his coat. "Let's go have a look." On the way to Montmartre, the streets were still slick from the rain, the shop awnings dripping at their edges. They passed a bakery where the windows steamed from inside, and a tabac where two men stood smoking under the awning, their conversation stopping as the police car rolled by. Maigret watched the pavements, the doorways, the hunched shapes under. Umbrellas. Rue des Trois Frères was a narrow street where laundry lines still hung between some of the windows despite the drizzle. The concierge's lodge smelled faintly of cabbage soup and coal. She was a small, wiry woman with the eyes of a bird, quick and watchful. "It was still there when I came down at 6, she told Maigret, pointing toward the door at the far end of the dim corridor. "I thought perhaps she'd left it herself, but Madame Leblanc never does that." The door in question was painted a dull green, the paint chipped near the lock. Maigret bent and examined the key, still protruding slightly, turned halfway, as if someone had given up on locking it. It was indeed a different type from the usual building keys, older, heavier, the kind one found in country houses or provincial hotels. Madame Leblanc appeared in the doorway, pale and uneasy in a housecoat. She clutched the lapels together as if to keep out a chill. "Inspector, I know it sounds foolish, but I felt, I don't know, as if someone had been here. Nothing's gone, but there was a glass on the sink that I don't remember using, and the curtains in the sitting room were drawn, though I left them open." Maigret listened without interrupting, his eyes moving slowly around the flat as she spoke. A small sitting room with lace curtains, a canary cage by the window, 2 photographs on the mantel, a man in uniform and a boy in a school cap. The air smelled faintly of furniture polish and something else, a hint of damp wool, as though someone had stood there in wet clothes for a while. He didn't touch the key yet. He didn't ask her more questions than necessary. Sometimes people talked themselves into revealing more when the silence stretched. "Would you know this key if you saw it before?" he asked finally. She shook her head. No, but I don't like it, Inspector. I hardly slept at all last night. Maigret nodded, turning the heavy brass key between his fingers. A key in the wrong door was a small thing. But it was the kind of small thing that could open more than one lock if you waited long enough, and Maigret, as always, was prepared to wait. They stayed in the corridor a few minutes longer than politeness required. Madame Leblanc stood with her hands pressed to the housecoat, the nervous smile of someone apologizing for making a fuss. The concierge hovered at a distance, pretending to wipe a picture frame with a rag already clean. Janvier looked to Maigret for a cue. He had learned the rhythm. When the chief went quiet, words were a disturbance, the way a pebble is to still water. "May I?" Maigret asked at last, nodding toward the small kitchen. She stepped aside immediately. The glass in question stood by the sink, turned upside down to dry on a dish towel. He lifted it, weighing nothing much. A trace of moisture clung in a ring. No lipstick, no sugar rim. He sniffed. Only the neutral, faintly chalky smell of the tap. He set it down and, without seeming to, let his eyes roam. A saucer on the table with a smear of grey, as if someone had tapped out a cigarette there and then wiped it away with a finger. There was no ashtray visible, and the air did not hold smoke. The canary chirped once and fluffed itself. In the sitting room, the curtains were drawn, as she had said, and that other odour still lay low in the fabric and carpet, damp wool. A person who had come in from the rain and waited a while without moving much. "Do you smoke, madame?" he asked, not looking at her. "No," she said. "Never." "And your visitors?" He turned and offered the smallest of smiles, the sort that permitted a lie to vanish without shame. "I don't receive many. My sister comes on Sundays when it's fine. And the boy upstairs sometimes asks if I have onion for his soup when he's cooking, that's all." "The boy's name?" "Henri. 23, a waiter. He keeps odd hours." He nodded, filing the unimportant-sounding name, where such names often proved useful later. The photographs on the mantel, the man in uniform, husband, was from another time, the sort of studio portrait with the neck a fraction too rigid. The boy in the school cap had an old-fashioned solemnity. The photographer had probably asked him not to blink. Maigret glanced once at Madame Leblanc's face in profile, at the way her mouth held a line as if remembering both men at once. "Widows often arranged rooms so that the absence didn't echo. And you are certain you drew these curtains after supper?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I like to see the lights of the street before I sleep. I leave them open. A little, the lace ones. But when I woke at 4, they were closed." He did not contradict her sense of time. People knew their own habits. They sometimes betrayed themselves in the details, but just as often the details were what proved them truthful. He turned the heavy key again in his palm. There were tiny nicks on the bit, the kind one got from an impatient hand twisting at an angle. The bow had a flat, almost decorative oval, and the metal was brass that had known many fingers. "May I take this for a day or two?" he asked. "We'll see where it belongs." She looked relieved. "Please, will you—" "Should I change the lock?" He shook his head. "Not yet. Keep the chain on tonight, and don't worry. If someone wanted to steal, they'd have taken something to prove the visit to themselves. This is another sort of matter." He saw her turn that last sentence over, as if it were both comfort and puzzle. In the hall, the concierge cocked her, head like a sparrow. "You'll tell me if I should watch the doorway, Monsieur Inspector," she said quickly, as if afraid the question would be thought officious. "You're already watching it," Maigret said. "Only keep doing what you always do. People notice when we change our habits." Out in the street, the rain had thinned to a whisper, hanging in the air rather than falling. The cafes along Rue des Trois Frères smelled of coffee and wet wool. A delivery boy in an oversized cap passed them with a crate of bottles, and when he saw the brassard on Janvier's sleeve, his face arranged itself into indifference. "The delivery man?" Maigret asked. "From the grocery 3 doors down," Janvier said. "Name's Louis. He said the key was sticking out when he came, at 6. He knocked, but there was no answer, so he told the concierge. He didn't touch anything." They found Louis behind the zinc counter of the grocery, slicing a length of dry sausage with more concentration than necessary. He was 19, perhaps, with the untroubled skin of someone who slept soundly because his worries were never abstract. He repeated his story, then added, "It's not their key, that one. Ours are the modern type. That one's like my grand-mère had in the country." "How so?" Maigret asked. Louis shrugged. "Heavier. And the teeth." "The bit," he corrected. Himself quickly, surprised to know the word. "They're wide. Like for a big old lock. Did you see anyone near the door before 6? "No, monsieur." "Before 6, it's always before 6, Janvier murmured as they stepped back into the street. He said it without cynicism, merely as a fact. They walked a block with no particular destination, letting the quarter present itself. It was an old habit of Maigret's, walking a fact through its own neighborhood. The baker, wiping the fog from his window with the back of his hand, watched them, passed, then bent again over his loaves. A woman in a headscarf shook her umbrella free of droplets before entering a stairwell. She did it with that odd, thoughtful patience people had when their minds were elsewhere. "Locksmith," Maigret said, seeing a narrow shop with a window display of keys and fobs and labels yellowed by nicotine. Inside, the smell of metal filings and cheap pipe tobacco sat thickly. The locksmith himself was thin as a nail, with moustaches that had grown beyond fashion and hardened into principle. "Seen a key like this?" Maigret asked, laying it on the counter without preamble. The man took it as a jeweler takes a ring, not for the value but for the intimacy of the object. He turned it, peered along the bit. Old warded type, not common in Paris anymore, except in cupboards and cellars that haven't been modernized, or certain small hotels where the owners keep everything because everything is paid for. "See this notch? That's provincial. The blank would have been cut outside. Dijon, Lyon, I couldn't say. The oval bow. Hotels liked those, often with a brass tag that gets removed when things change hands." "When things change hands," Maigret repeated. "People sell hotels," the locksmith said with a shrug, "or they stop being hotels. A key travels longer than the building sometimes." Back on the pavement, Janvier said, "A hotel key in a widow's door. It starts to look like something and nothing at once." "That's how it should look," Maigret said. "If it looked like something at the beginning, it would end in nothing." They didn't go back to the Quai des Orfèvres at once. Instead, Maigret suggested they sit a while, and they chose a café with a view of the building's doorway. The proprietor had a face the color of the wood he polished and wore his dissatisfaction with the world like a tight waistcoat. Two men at the far end played belote without speaking, and each time a card was set down, there was a tiny slap with more personality than the players gave away. They drank coffee. Maigret didn't light his pipe. Sometimes the smell of tobacco attracted certain kinds of men and repelled others, and he preferred the neutrality of coffee and rain. He watched the building's entrance for patterns, who passed without glancing, who looked and then pretended not to. Habit is a timetable. It tells you when something is late. Around 11, a young man with a waiter's pallor crossed the street at a diagonal. Henri, perhaps. He had the look of someone measuring whether he had time to sleep before lunch service. He went in, taking the steps two at a time. In the next half hour, a postman with a canvas bag and resigned shoulders delivered 3 letters to the lodge, chatted with the concierge about the price of onions, and left biting at his lower lip, as if it were a piece of straw. "What now?" Janvier asked softly. "Now we talk to the boy," Maigret said, "and anyone else who knows how often the curtains in number 12 are open or shut." They climbed the narrow stairs, each step polished by generations of feet. On the second landing, a door stood ajar, and a radio murmured a dance tune too soft to dance to. Henri answered their knock with the universal wariness of those woken from a day sleeper's sleep. His eyes were open, but not yet focused on the present. "We won't keep you," Maigret said. "You're Henri. You know Madame Leblanc below." "She's nice," the boy said, rubbing his face. "She gives me time when I cook rabbit. You were home last night?" "Late. I worked until 2. I got in about 1:30. Quiet." "Did you see anyone in the hall?" "Smell smoke, hear a door close." He frowned, honest in the way of someone too tired to invent. "I heard steps, I think, not long after I came in. Slow. I thought it was the concierge taking coal, but maybe it was. I don't know. I slept." "Do you smoke?" Janvier asked. Sometimes. Not here. She doesn't like it, madame. I smoke on the landing, window open. When did you last smoke there? Henry searched his memory like a pocket. Yesterday afternoon before work, which didn't explain the faint smear on the saucer downstairs, but then faint smears rarely explained themselves immediately. They thanked him and let him close the door softly, careful of other sleepers. On the first-floor landing, a man in an overcoat too heavy for the season was just mounting the steps. He had a parcel under his arm wrapped in brown paper and string. He saw the policeman, nodded with exaggerated correctness, and went on without slowing. "Tenant?" Janvier murmured. "Or someone who wants to be," Maigret said. They returned. To the street. Noon bells in the distance were muffled by the damp air. A bus labored uphill, coughing, and a woman came out of the butcher's with liver wrapped in paper, the blood soaking through like a small, dark map. The ordinary city continued, indifferent, as always. The key weighed no more than before in Maigret's pocket, but it had acquired an outline in his mind, the way a pebble acquires edges when you feel it too long. He considered phoning the office to have Lognon sent up. The gloomy inspector knew these hilly streets in his bones and carried a perpetual sense of slight when cases failed to arrange themselves respectfully. But there was no case yet, only a set of small displacements, a key that belonged elsewhere, curtains that didn't match their habit, a glass rinsed and set to dry, the residue of smoke in a room where no one smoked, the felt sense of a person who had stood in quiet for a time, as if measuring the room against an old memory. "You'll want me to ask the small hotels," Janvier said, already pulling his coat close at the throat. "Who's missing a key like this or used to have one?" "If you like," Maigret said, "not in a hurry. Choose those on streets where people don't go unless they live there. Ask the older proprietors, the ones with the voice like a broom. And the locksmiths? Later. One expert opinion is enough for today." He walked Janvier part way, down the street, and then stopped. "I'll stay a while. Tell the office not to wait for me for lunch." Janvier hesitated, as if to ask the question they all wanted to at such moments. "What are you waiting for?" Then thought better of it, and went. Maigret turned back toward the café and then, with a change of mind that was more a shift of weight than a decision, went instead to the building's doorway and stood under the arch out of the fine rain. He filled his pipe, did not light it, and let the stem rest between his teeth. People came and went. After a time, the concierge, who had been busy with her ledger, appeared as if by accident and stood near him, smelling lightly of cabbage and starch. "It's an old building," she said to no one in particular. "It keeps its secrets." "All buildings do," he said. "People give them secrets to keep." She looked at him sideways. "You think someone came to remember something?" He did not answer with words which might have frightened away the thought. He let silence stand. After a moment she nodded, satisfied with her own idea. There would be an afternoon, and then an evening. He would go home at some point and eat, a stew his wife had kept warm, and perhaps he would suggest a cinema for another night. Yes, he would suggest it, and she would smile and say, "At last." But not today. Today was for a key that had chosen the wrong door, because whoever carried it had lost the right one, or could not bear to use it again. Maigret waited, not for a culprit, but for the next small thing to drift across the surface of the day and make a ring that touched all the others. The drizzle became a thin mist that blurred the outlines of the buildings and left the cobbles, slick, almost black. Maigret stayed in the doorway a while longer, pipe unlit, feeling the slow seep of damp into the cuffs of his trousers. It was the sort of weather that discouraged unnecessary movement. People walked with their heads lowered, shoulders hunched, glancing only at what they needed to see. A man might stand unnoticed for hours, as long as he didn't give the air of waiting for anyone in particular. The concierge had returned to her lodge, the door left slightly ajar so she could hear if anyone came or went. Somewhere upstairs, a radio murmured a slow chanson, the singer's voice blurred by distance. A cat stepped lightly across the street and vanished between two bins, its fur plastered flat by the moisture. Shortly after 1 o'clock, a woman emerged from the building, adjusting the strap of a handbag with a small, distracted tug. She was in her 30s, neatly dressed, but in clothes that had been altered more than once. She hesitated under the archway, glancing toward the left, then the right, before turning uphill. Maigret watched her until she reached the corner and disappeared. He didn't follow. He only noted the way she carried herself, the faint inward stoop of someone accustomed to keeping her movements contained as if they might spill. From inside the lodge, the concierge called his name in a lowered voice, the kind meant to carry just far enough. He stepped in. "You saw her. Mademoiselle Perrin," she said. "Lives on the second floor, across from the young waiter. Works in a dressmaker's shop near the boulevard. She's often about in the afternoons, keeps to herself. Has she lived here long?" 3 years. Before that, she was in the 11th arrondissement. I only know because she told me when she moved in. She likes the quiet here." Maigret nodded, as if the information were no more than casual gossip, and stepped back into the street. The quiet of the building struck him now not as absence, but as a kind of compression, the way a handkerchief folds into a pocket. Certain places held their occupants in such a way that movements within them mattered more. He decided to walk the block once, not in search of anything but to feel the geography. The small hotels were easy to spot. Discreet brass plaques, narrow lobbies glimpsed through glass, the faint smell of floor polish and breakfast rolls lingering even after midday. At the third such place, Hôtel Saint-Clair, the proprietor, was a woman of an age hard to place, with powdered cheeks and a black dress that spoke more of habit than mourning. "We don't keep keys like that anymore," she said, after he showed her the one in his pocket. "All ours are the new kind and smaller, but I've seen one like it. Hôtel des Voyageurs, 2 streets over. They kept the old locks until last year." He thanked her and made the detour. The Hôtel des Voyageurs was a tall, narrow building, with a doorway that smelled faintly of wax and damp wood. The man behind the desk was bald, heavy-set, with a manner that suggested he was storing more grievances than he could air in an afternoon. He took the key in his palm, turned it once, and let out a grunt. "Yes, that's ours, or was. We changed the locks in April. Too many of the old ones had gone missing over the years. Guests take them, you know, as souvenirs, or other reasons." "Who would have had this one?" Maigret asked. The man scratched the side of his jaw. "Hard to say. That number—" He pointed at a faintly scratched 4 on the bow. "Ours room 4, it faced the street. We've had dozens through there, couples, traveling salesmen. 1 or 2 who stayed long enough for us to wonder if they were looking for work or hiding from it." "Any recent long-term guests before?" "The locks changed. A man named Carpentier, quiet, paid cash every week. Left suddenly in March. Said he had to go to Lyon. Didn't leave an address. There was also a woman, a Madame Bréant, stayed for 2 months while her flat was being painted. Moved out in February. She was particular. Didn't like the smell of varnish, she said. Always kept her curtains shut. Curtains shut. Maigret felt the thought settle but did not speak it. "And if someone still had one of these old keys?" he asked. The man shrugged. "It might open nothing now. Or the front door if we hadn't changed that one. But we did. Still, people sometimes try them elsewhere. Old locks can be alike in ways you wouldn't think." Back outside, Maigret paused under the awning to light his pipe at last, letting the tobacco smoke curl into the damp air. He could. Picture someone standing in the rain with such a key in their pocket, the weight of it a reminder of a place once entered freely, a door that had closed on something unfinished. And then one night, for reasons they might barely name to themselves, they tried it in another door. Not to steal, perhaps not even to see the person inside, simply to confirm that they still could. The thought followed him back to Rue des Trois Frères. Janvier had not returned. The street seemed unchanged. The concierge greeted him with the satisfaction of one who feels events moving around her without yet knowing their shape. "You've had visitors before today?" he asked her. She shook her head. "Not since the plumber last week." "Why?" "Because sometimes," he said, "a building story starts with someone no one remembers seeing." He went upstairs to Madame Leblanc's again. She opened the door more easily this time, as though his earlier visit had made him part of the building's rhythm. The curtains were open. The canary hopped from perch to perch. "I've spoken to a hotel nearby," he said, placing the key gently on the table. "It once belonged there. Perhaps someone who stayed there knows you, or remembers you from somewhere else." She frowned slightly, as if turning over the idea in her mind. I've never been in a hotel in Paris, Inspector. Only once in Tours, with my husband, many years ago. And the name Carpentier means nothing to you? No. She hesitated. Should it? He didn't answer directly. If someone were to stand in your sitting room, looking out at the street through the curtains, would they see anything worth the trouble? Her eyes went briefly to the window, then back to him. Only the baker's sign and the rain. He let the silence grow, the way he might in an interview room, until she looked away first. If anything unusual happens tonight, a noise, a step in the hall, keep the chain on and call for the concierge. Don't open to anyone you don't expect. When he stepped back into the corridor, he felt the faint shift in air that comes when someone else on the floor is listening through their own door. He didn't turn his head. The sound of a latch clicking softly confirmed it. By late afternoon, the mist had thickened. The street lamps glowed weakly, halos bleeding into the air. Maigret returned to the cafe opposite and took the same table, the one with a clear line to the building's entrance. The proprietor brought him a glass without being asked. Inside the lodge, the concierge busied herself with her ledger again, though her eyes lifted every time the door opened. It was almost 6 when Henri, the waiter, came down the steps, hair damp from a hasty combing. He paused to exchange a word with the concierge, then went out into the street, heading uphill at a brisk pace. A minute later, the woman Maigret had seen earlier, Mademoiselle Perrin, came in from the opposite direction, stepping quickly, under the arch without looking toward the cafe. The two had crossed paths by seconds. Maigret sat back, the glass cool in his hand, and thought of the key in the wrong door, the smoke in the wrong room, and the curtains closed against a street. That seemed to watch as much as be watched. There was no hurry yet. The evening would bring its own adjustments, and someone, perhaps without realizing it, would show what they had been carrying all along. The first lights began to appear in the windows above the street, pale rectangles, against the thickening dusk. The drizzle had slackened, leaving a faint sheen on the cobbles, the smell of damp brick rising in the cool air. Maigret remained at his table, the glass in front of him now half forgotten, pipe unlit between his fingers. He had learned long ago that certain hours, those when the day changes hands with the night, had a way of loosening the knots in people's behavior. A door opened more readily, a voice lowered without being asked. The concierge came out, to sweep the step, though the street needed no sweeping. She worked with slow, deliberate strokes, glancing every so often toward the top of the hill as if expecting someone. Across the way, Henri had not yet returned. Mademoiselle Perrin's window was lit but curtained, a soft glow pressing faintly against the lace. When the door opened again, it was Madame Leblanc who emerged. She had changed into a dark coat and carried a small shopping bag folded neatly under her arm. Maigret rose without haste, leaving coins on the saucer, and stepped into the street. Out for the evening, madam? She looked startled for the briefest moment, then managed a polite smile. Just to the grocer's. I need bread for tomorrow. Would you mind if I walked with you? She hesitated, only for a breath, and nodded. They went down the hill together, her steps measured. The bag under her arm held a little too tightly. She spoke of the weather, the dampness in the building, the way the canary disliked the gloom. He listened, saying almost nothing, until they reached the small grocery. She went in. He remained outside, looking through the window without appearing to. She selected her bread quickly, exchanged a few words with the grocer, and came out again. On the way back, she glanced up toward the darkening windows. It's a quiet street, she said, almost to herself. I thought it would be comforting. It is, Maigret replied, though sometimes quiet makes us hear things we'd rather not. She did not answer, but he saw her jaw tighten slightly. When they reached her door, he let her go in alone, watching as the concierge took the bread from her to wrap in paper. He returned to the cafe. A short time later, Henri reappeared, walking more slowly now, a cigarette cupped in his hand against the damp air. He crossed the street without looking toward Maigret and disappeared inside. Minutes later, Mademoiselle Perrin left her apartment again, this time in a light coat, her hair pinned more carefully. She moved quickly toward the boulevard. It might have been coincidence, the young man arriving, the young woman leaving, but Maigret noted the precision of the timing, the way each seemed to avoid the other's presence. At 7:30, the street settled into evening. The few passers-by were residents, identifiable by the keys they carried or the familiar nods they exchanged with the concierge. The windows above stayed lit, except for one on the top floor, which went dark abruptly, as if its occupant had left. Without turning back, it was then that Maigret saw the figure. A man in a light-colored raincoat, collar turned up, came down the hill from the shadows. His stride was slow, his gaze fixed ahead. He passed the building once, turned at the corner, and came back the other way. This time, he paused just long, enough to glance at the door before walking on. Maigret lit his pipe at last, drawing the smoke in deeply. The man's face had been pale under the street lamp, the mouth set in a line that suggested neither hurry nor ease, a face that knew the building and did not wish to be known in return. He paid for his drink and crossed the street. Inside the lodge, the concierge was closing her ledger. "Who is the man in the light raincoat?" he asked quietly. She looked blank for a moment, then her eyes narrowed slightly. "Could be Monsieur Villon. He used to live here, on 3rd floor, front. Moved out last year, but I've seen him pass by once or twice." "Did he know Madame Leblanc?" "Oh yes, he spoke to her often. They would stand in the hall talking. He was a quiet tenant, left without a fuss." "Why did he leave?" The concierge hesitated, as if the answer might be more than she wanted to give. "He said the stairs were too much for him, but—" She lowered her voice. "I think he was in some trouble. There were visitors, men who didn't look like family." "Do you know where he went?" She shook her head. "Somewhere near the canal, I heard." Maigret stepped back into the damp air. The street was empty now, but the image of the man's pale face stayed with him. A man who had once lived behind that green-painted door, or one very near it, who had known the widow and who now walked past in the half-dark, looking but not stopping. Back in the cafe, he took a corner table where he could watch without being seen. He ordered another drink, letting the minutes stretch. The building's windows became squares of gold against the night. Around 9, Mademoiselle Perrin returned, slipping inside quickly. Not long after, Henri went out again, this time with a small parcel under his arm. He did not return for over an hour. When at last Maigret rose to leave, he crossed once more to the lodge. The concierge was drowsing in her chair, but roused herself at his step. "If you see Monsieur Villon again," he said, "tell him the police would like a word. Nothing urgent." She nodded, the corners of her mouth twitching in the faint satisfaction of being drawn into the matter. As Maigret walked away, the mist thickened once more, swallowing the upper floors of the buildings. He thought of the key in his pocket, heavy and purposeless now, unless in the hand of someone for whom its weight meant something. He thought of Madame Leblanc's tightened jaw, of Mademoiselle Perrin's swift departures, of Henri's careful comings and goings, and of a man in a light raincoat who passed by doors he no longer had the right to open. It would be a matter of waiting, of letting the threads cross naturally. And when they did, it would not be with noise, but with the soft click of a key turning where it should not fit. Night had a way of simplifying Paris, paring it down to the weight of footsteps and the steam on cafe windows. Maigret walked away. From Rue des Trois Frères without hurry. The drizzle turned to a fine powder that clung to felt and wool. He crossed the river where the lamps made islands on the water, and by the time he reached Boulevard Richard Lenoir, the mist had begun to smell faintly of coal and soup. At home, his wife had kept a pot on the back of the stove. When he came in, she didn't ask at once about the day. They ate first, as they always did, the silence domestic and easy. "You didn't light your pipe," she said finally, seeing it in his hand like a postponed thought. "I didn't want to disturb the rain," he said. He set the heavy hotel key on the saucer beside his plate. It looked wrong there, too bright against the porcelain. She glanced at it without curiosity. She had grown used to objects that came home with him for a day or two. A torn glove, a notebook, a train ticket worn soft by fingers. "If you leave that on the table, you'll dream of doors," she said. He smiled. "It belonged to a room that doesn't exist anymore." "Rooms don't stop existing," she said, wiping a spoon. People just stop going back to them. They keep a key anyway. It makes them feel they could if they wanted. He watched her fold the dishcloth, considered the way she had said people, broad enough to include everyone and no one. "When you draw the curtains," he asked, "do you do it before or after you wash the glass?" She gave him a look that was both fond and practical. "After, otherwise the water spots catch the street lamp and you see your own mess." "Why?" "No reason." Though of course there was. He looked at the key again, and the 4 scratched clumsily on its bow. "We should go to the cinema one night," he said, feeling the promise settle like a small warm stone. "Not tonight." "Not tonight," she agreed, satisfied with the future. The telephone rang at 9:30. Janvier's voice came, through with the tin rattle of the line. "I've started on the hotels like you said. 2 have kept their old stock out of laziness. 1 remembers losing a key last year. At the Voyageurs, the proprietor swore half his old keys walked off over the years. He remembered the woman who hated varnish, Brayon, and a man named Carpentier who left in March. No address. I asked about former tenants of our building. He knew a Villon by sight, came to take coffee in their lobby sometimes, liked to sit, where he could see the street. "Thank you," Maigret said. "Sleep." "I might," Janvier said, not optimistically, and hung up. After the washing up, Maigret took his pipe to the window and stood a while. The boulevard trees dripped steadily, their leaves bruised dark by the wet. He thought of the concierge's face turned toward the hill as if expecting a weather change that never came, of Mademoiselle Perrin's careful timing, Henri's small parcels, and the pale oval of a man's face under a weak lamp. He thought of curtains drawn by a hand that had not lived with them long enough to learn the habit. He thought of a glass turned upside down, a smear where ash had been rubbed away with a fingertip, and a room, room 4, where a man once sat, to look at a certain piece of street as if it balanced him. "You'll be up early," his wife said from the doorway, not as a question. He nodded. She came to stand beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "People go back to look at their lives," she said, speaking to the glass. "Not to take them, to look." He slept, and in sleep the key became water-heavy, the way certain objects do when they are more idea than metal. In the morning he woke before his alarm, the shape of a thought fully formed at last. If a key travels further than a building, a view travels further than a room. He wanted to stand in the old room and see what had kept a man sitting there with coffee, long enough to feel that a door, any door, might still open. The city was grey and rinsed clean when he reached Montmartre again. Milkmen had already gone. Bakers were finishing the first round of bread. He stopped at the Voyageurs and let the proprietor complain about the cost of modern locks and the lack of respect in modern hands. "Room 4, the man said, his mouth folding into a line that suggested an old grievance enjoyed on principle. "You'll want to see if the new tenants have put up curtains. They haven't. People don't understand drafts anymore." The corridor smelled of varnish and old wool, even with the new locks. Room 4 opened on a space that had once been 2 rooms. Some owner had knocked a thin wall away decades ago and then regretted it, leaving a seam down the floor where the boards did not meet cleanly. The bed was made too tight. At the window, Maigret put his hands flat against the lintel and looked out. 2 streets over the hill slid down toward Rue des Trois Frères. You could not see the green-painted door from here, but you could see the baker's hanging sign with its painted loaf, and the way the awning sagged after rain. If you sat with your coffee at the small round table pressed to the window, the sign would be at the right height, rocking slightly when a truck passed. "You had a tenant who liked to watch the morning from here," Maigret said without turning. "They all think they're the first to have that idea," the proprietor said. "Carpentier liked it. The older one, Villon, too, when he came to visit people." "Visit who?" "Different faces, not women. Men who looked like they were pretending not to know each other. I never asked. It was none of my business until they forgot to pay." Back on the pavement, the air had thickened again into mist. He walked slowly toward Rue des Trois Frères without intending to, letting his feet find the familiar slope. The concierge saw him from her lodge and straightened, pleased. "He came," she said at once, before he had asked. "Monsieur Villon, late. He didn't want to come in. Stood there with his collar up. Said, 'Tell the inspector I kept a key once to a door that doesn't open anymore.'" Then he laughed, like someone telling himself a joke. I asked where he lived now. He said, "The canal collects people who drift." That's what he said. Did he go upstairs? No. He stood in the hall a moment, looked toward number 12 as if listening. Did you see his hands? She blinked. Yes, red at the knuckles like a man who washes in cold water. Did he smell of smoke? No. Do you have damp wool and a little, she wrinkled her nose, polish, floor polish. Maigret left her with that and climbed to the second floor. On the landing, the window was open a finger's width to let the damp air through. On the sill, a square of ash no larger than a postage stamp had caught in a crack. He touched it. It went to grey paste on his fingertip, recent enough to hold shape before the moisture took it. He wiped his hand on his handkerchief and knocked. At number 12. Madame Leblanc opened with the cautious relief of someone glad to see a familiar face in the morning. The canary hopped. The room smelled of coffee and beeswax. "He came last night," she said before he could speak. "Villon?" She nodded. "He didn't knock. I heard his step on the landing. He has a particular way, as if his right foot were. Testing the stair first. I stood behind the door with my hand on the chain. He didn't try the handle. He went away. Did you sleep?" "After a while. I left the curtains open. It felt less—" She searched for the word. "Close." He looked at the mantel. The photographs seemed to have moved, though perhaps it was only that he was seeing them from a different angle. The boy in the school cap had a shadow across one eye that made the expression look older. "Your husband liked hotels?" he asked suddenly. She shook her head. "He was a baker. He liked to be in his own bed. He would leave before dawn. He didn't care for rooms that smelled of other people." Her mouth softened. "He wouldn't have left a key behind." "Your son?" A brief tightening, almost. "Invisible. He died many years ago. Influenza. He was 12. She reached to adjust the frame as if the glass might keep dust off memory. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. Silence laid its cloth on the table between them. When it had done its work, he said, "You knew Villon when he lived here. As one knows neighbors. He would carry my parcels if he met me on the stairs. He spoke of the canal, of the barges. He said water remembers only the banks. Did he ever come in?" "Once. To move the wardrobe. I cannot lift the corner. Had a sweep." He glanced toward the wardrobe, a heavy piece that fit the wall like something built in place. "May I?" She made the smallest gesture of assent. He bent and took the bottom edge in his hands. It slid easier than its weight suggested. Gliding over cut soap rubbed along its feet. Behind it the wall was pale where the paper had not faded. On the skirting board, a thin line of dust except for one place. An oval brushed clean as if a man had stood there with his shoulder to the wood and his head tipped to listen. He put the wardrobe back without comment. On the landing, the door opposite opened a crack. Mademoiselle Perrin's eye, made larger by the glass, regarded him. He waited. The door opened the rest of the way with an air of resignation. "I left early last night," she said before he asked. "So that I would not meet Henri on the stairs. It is easier that way." "Easier for what?" "To remain polite." "You and he—" She shook her head. "No, he is young. He wants to talk loudly when he is tired. I want quiet when I am awake. We live across from each other, and that is already too much sometimes." "Did you smell smoke yesterday evening?" "I smelled polish at dawn. The concierge cleaned late. She does that when she is anxious. Smoke, perhaps near the window. Someone stood there." "When was the last time you were in a hotel?" he asked abruptly. She made a surprised face and then laughed softly at herself. "Never, monsieur. I would not know what to do with the bedclothes." He thanked her. On the stairs he met Henri, hair damp, eyes a little bloodshot. "You were late last night," Maigret said mildly. Henri lifted a shoulder. "After work we sometimes eat. There is a place where we can sit without being told to leave." "Do you know Villon?" "By sight. He borrows matches." "From you?" "From anyone. He doesn't keep things that run out, the concierge says." On the street the day had steadied into its grey. Maigret crossed to the café and took the table by the window. The proprietor brought coffee without asking, and then stood with his towel watching the doorway opposite as if its traffic were a weather report. "Your Villon." the man said at last. "He comes sometimes for soup, doesn't talk, sits where he can see that sign." He nodded toward the baker's wooden loaf. You'd think he was waiting for someone to move it. Maigret drank and let the warmth go into his hands. The jaw. Remark turned in his head like a key in an old lock, slow at first, then finding its notch. A man who keeps nothing that runs out keeps a key that does not. A man who leaves rooms keeps the view. If he could not go back to room 4, he would go to where the view could be reconstructed. The same sign, the same slope, the same hour. And perhaps, like the hand wiping a rim of ash from a saucer, he would adjust tiny things to make the past sit properly. The curtains closed as they had been in a different February, a glass rinsed as a habit from another life. He rose before finishing the cup and returned to the Voyagers. The proprietor, affronted by the repetition, handed him the master key with a sigh meant to register on posterity. In room 4 again, he sat at the little table and looked out until the sign across the way lined up with the cornice of a house on the next street. The angle was precise. Back at Madame Leblanc's, that same cornice was visible beyond the lace at exactly the height to make a man believe, in rain and with his collar up, that a missing room had been laid over this one like tracing paper. The hallway of number 12. He stood with his back to the wardrobe and listened. Sound came up from the street in soft eddies. A truck changing gears, the slap of cards on a zinc counter. A woman's laugh cut short by the thought of something else. He imagined a man here at 4 in the morning, damp at the shoulders, holding his breath and hearing nothing except a canary shift its feet and the tiny click of a chain against a door. Not a thief, a patient. A man who had traded one life for another and found the new one tasteless, who had a pocket heavy with a key that had to fit somewhere. When he went down to the lodge, the concierge looked at him in expectation. He said, "If you see Villon today, tell him I prefer to meet at the cafe. He won't have to come inside." "He'll like that," she said. "He doesn't believe in thresholds anymore." "Does he believe in work?" She pursed her lips. "He believes in the canal. It takes work away from you. You stand and it moves." Maigret returned to the cafe and chose the table facing the door, pipe again unlit. The hotel key a round weight in his pocket. He felt the day settle into its groove, the hour when errands pause and appetites start to think about themselves. He was not waiting for a confession, only for a man to sit where the view made him feel that a life he had lost could be seen again for the price of soup. And in that sitting, in the way he would look or not look at a window where curtains now stood open, something would finally fit with a small, barely audible click. The cafe filled slowly with the kinds of people who owned their hour. Small shopkeepers, closing early to be generous with themselves, a postman folding his cap into his pocket along with the day, a woman who took her soup with a measured precision that suggested there would be no surprises afterward. Maigret sat with his back to the wall, pipe in his hand unlit, the wet street in his eye like a strip of film that would replay as often as needed. The concierge's lodge door stood ajar across the way, a mouth that breathed in comings and goings, and behind its glass the woman's head moved now and again, just enough to keep time with the doorbell that never rang. Near noon he felt, rather than saw, a change in the air, the way a draft slips when another door has opened somewhere. The man in the light raincoat had come without haste as before, letting his steps be counted by the cobbles. He glanced only once into the cafe, and then chose a table by the window, not the one with the best view, but the one that allowed him to see the baker's sign without turning his head. He kept his coat on, collar raised, as if committed to being a passerby even while seated. The proprietor wiped the same spot on the zinc, considered the distance, and then took a bowl of soup over with the expression of a man who knows when a customer intends to speak only to the steam. The man cupped the bowl with both hands and looked at the surface as if to read it. Up close, his face was no longer pale so much as thinned by weather. The skin around the mouth had that beaten look some men acquire from walking into wind too often. His knuckles were reddened and ridged, the nails trimmed with a knife. Maigret did not go to him at once. He finished his coffee, set the pipe down as if it were heavier than it was, and then rose without announcing that he had decided to move. He walked the short distance as if the room had tilted gently in that direction. "Villon," he said. "The man lifted his eyes and nodded once. "Inspector." The voice was hoarse, but not from drink. He looked at the chair opposite as if measuring whether it could hold the conversation. Maigret sat. "Soup is good," Villon said. "It tastes of onions. They don't always let the onions be themselves." "Where do you sleep?" Maigret asked, as if it were the next line in a familiar script. "Near the canal, where the barges turn. There's a wall that keeps the wind from choosing you. You can be someone else if you stand behind a wall. You used to live over there." Maigret tilted his head toward the building. "Third floor." "A year," Villon said. "A little more. You count by winters, and the number is different. You left because men came to see you." "They came because they did not like that I owed them the second half of what I had paid them the first half for." The corner of his mouth moved, not to smile. "I have the sort of face that suggests I could be persuaded to pay forever, but faces are only faces. You said to the concierge that you kept a key once to a door that doesn't open anymore." Villon looked at him with that patient expression men wear when asked to explain something the weather has already explained. "A hotel changes its locks and a man's hand does not know it yet. He puts his hand in his pocket because the metal is there. He goes where he knows, and the door says, 'Not you.' So he goes somewhere that looks like where he knows, and the door says nothing, which is almost the same as yes." "Is that what happened last night?" "I stood in the hall," Villon said. He did not hurry his words. "I listened. It is like putting your ear to a rail. You hear the train you once took. I did not try the handle. The chain would be on. It always is on with her." "With her?" He lifted one shoulder. "With the woman who lives in the room where the view is right. She is a careful person. She holds her bag tight even when it is empty." "You know her?" "We have carried parcels together," he said. "When a string broke, we have said the weather is not what it used to be. That sort of knowing." "You left a key in her door." Villon looked at his reddened hands as if they might remember better than he did. "I turned away and the pocket was lighter. When I got to the corner, I felt it. I went back and the key was not in my pocket. Sometimes your fingers put things down without asking you. They want to be rid of weight." "It's a hotel key." "It is a room key," Villon said, and for the first time, something in his voice warmed, faintly obstinate. 4. The number makes a square in the mind. You sit and the sign across the way hangs just so. There was a time when I could drink coffee and think I was at a table I had paid for. That is all. "How you sat in room 4 with someone," Maigret said, as if tasting a very mild statement to see if it were true. Villon took a mouthful of soup, chewed the bread without haste, and swallowed before answering. "Some afternoons, there were other men. We said little. Some mornings there was no one. I preferred those. And in February," Maigret said, "there were curtains closed." Villon's eyes flickered to the window and back. "In February the light is a liar," he said. "People close curtains against the lie." He set the spoon down, careful, aligning it with the bowl's rim. "You think I frightened her. I did not want to. The glass by the sink, she doesn't remember rinsing it because she had decided to be afraid instead. When you are afraid, the last small things you did run away from you." "You don't smoke," Maigret said. "No." "There was ash in her kitchen. A smear." "The boy smokes on the landing," Villon said without emphasis. "He is careful. But the air is damp. You watched him and you watched the young woman across from him. You timed your comings and goings." "I watched the sign," Villon said. There was no irritation in it, only a small fatigue, like the end of a story, told many times. People are in front of signs, behind signs. They pass, the sign stays. They sat with the sound of cutlery and low conversation carrying itself around them. Across the street, the lodge door moved a fraction, and the concierge's face made a pale half-coin in the crack before it disappeared again. Rain freckled the window. Each drop erased a dot of street and then gave it back. "You knew the Hôtel des Voyageurs," Maigret said. "I knew a bed I paid weekly for," Villon corrected. Gently. "It had a table by a window. A man called himself Carpentier there for a while. He made little rows of coins on the table and then swept them into his hand when he went out so the table would not think it was rich. He liked to pretend that such things mattered. The woman with the varnish nose, Bréant, said the place always smelled of what the corridor had been scrubbed with. I told her that smell is only a map. She did not care for maps. She preferred to be lost with dignity." "Carpentier," Maigret repeated. Friend of yours? He talked, Villon said. I listened. He said he would go to Lyon. Everyone? Says Lion when they mean not here. He left before the locks changed. And you kept his key. I kept whichever key was last in my hand the day I stopped pretending the table was mine, Villon said. It might have been his, it might have been mine. Keys like to be confused. It gives them work. They were quiet a while. Maigret let his eyes go out of focus until the baker's sign across the way was no longer a painted loaf, but a rectangle that just happened to be brown. He thought of the brushed oval of dust behind Madame Leblanc's wardrobe and of the damp wool smell that sat low in her room, as if a man's coat had stood a minute and then moved away, adapting to a different wall. He thought of his wife's voice saying rooms do not stop existing. People stop going back to them. He thought of a hand rubbing ash into a smear and then wiping it once, the way one erases a word written too quickly. You'll leave her alone, Villon said unexpectedly, eyes still on the window. If she's left alone, Maigret said. The canal teaches you to keep moving, Villon murmured. You stand still, and something heavy bumps you, and then you must be other than yourself. Again. Were you other than yourself last night? I was what's left, he said. He lifted the spoon once more and finished the soup. I will not touch her door again. You may come to the station tomorrow, Maigret said. Not for trouble. To tell me the names you use when you need to be someone who is not expected to pay. To tell me where you sleep in case I must find you. Villon considered. At 9, I can be there and still be by the wall when the wind starts. You can tell the woman that I am the kind of person who looks and then goes. She will understand, because she is careful. He stood, set down a coin that was not enough, and then an additional one that made it exact. He did not look toward the building as he left. He looked at the sign. At the door he paused, adjusted his collar, and went out into the soft weather. The proprietor arrived at the table to remove the empty bowl with the proprietary satisfaction of a man who has been part of a conversation without having to hear it. An honest soup, Maigret said. It doesn't ask you to explain your hunger, the proprietor replied, pleased with himself, and went away. Across the way at the lodge, the concierge leaned out and made a small circling gesture with her finger to say that time had gone around once more and everything was as it always was. Maigret raised a hand. He did not go immediately to Madame Leblanc. There was nothing to say that would be better than leaving the hours alone. Instead, he walked the length of the street and back the other way, as if loosening the knot of it in his pocket. In the dressmaker's window near the boulevard, Mademoiselle Perrin had set up a dress form. She was pinning a hem with that careful inward stoop he had noticed, her mouth making the tiny movements of someone counting stitches in a language no one had taught her. She did not look up. On the return, he met Henri coming down with a crate tucked against his hip, the smell of raw onions rising from it. The boy nodded, half respectful, half wary, as if the inspector might ask him to account for the past and the future at once. Do you ever help the concierge with the floor? Maigret asked. Henri blinked. Sometimes. When she's cross with the Polish, it leaves streaks. You left the window open on the landing this morning. Yes. The smell is strong when it's damp. She likes to pretend it isn't there. I let it out. Did you see Villon? I saw him pass, Henri said. He walks like he's in water. He is, Maigret said. We all are some days. He let the boy go and went to stand again under the arch. The building made its small noises, pipes settling, a distant cupboard door closing, the canary making that tiny clockwork sound birds make when they accept the day as it is. He took the hotel key from his pocket and turned it in his hand. It was simple, bow shank bit, and it had travelled from a bed that no longer knew it to a door that had said nothing, to a pocket that had emptied itself without permission. The boughs scratched 4, caught the light, and then did not. In soy. The late afternoon he went upstairs once more, not to question but to lay a weight down gently. Madame Leblanc opened, her face composed. He came, she said ahead of him. I heard the cafe door, and then the street door, and then nothing. But nothing that you notice is still something. He won't touch your lock again, Maigret said. If you hear him, it will be like hearing rain. She exhaled, which is another way of saying thank you. I left the curtains open, she added, a little defiantly. "I prefer to see." "The sign, even if it lies." "Then leave them," he said. "It is work to keep them open, but it is a good kind of work." He did not stay. Back on the street, he felt the day prepare itself to slide into evening, that hour when the baker's second batch gives a last comfort to people who do not know what they are hungry for. He telephoned Janvier from the café to say at 9 tomorrow he'll come in if the wind allows it. Ask at the Voyagers about anyone who took coffee at the window and counted coins. Don't push, just let them remember the sound of him. "And tonight?" Janvier asked. "Tonight we listen," Maigret said. "The building will say whether anyone else has a key to a door that should not open. The wrong key is only one. Wrong thing." He hung up and remained at the table a long time, pipe unlit, watching the sign sway a fraction when a truck passed, thinking of a February with curtains closed, and of the way a man can try to line one life over another like tracing paper, until something small either fits or refuses to. At some hour, when the street no longer felt watched, he would climb the stairs once more and stand where the wardrobe had left its oval clean, and he would listen for the sound that did not belong. A step, a match, struck with too much care. The tiny click that tells you the door in the story is about to choose which side it opens onto. The evening settled into that soft hour when streets think about being empty, but can't quite bring themselves to it. Maigret let the cafe's warmth fall off his coat and went back under the arch where the building's breath was cool and smelled faintly of damp paper and soap. He stood without purpose a while, which is different from waiting. On the wall, near the mailboxes, the concierge had left her feather duster in a glass jar as if it were a flower. Somewhere upstairs, someone tested a pan with water and set it down again, deciding against tea. He tried the door to the cellar almost from habit, the way one tries a memory to see if it has changed. The lock was old and clumsy. The key from his pocket, the hotel's brass with its stubborn weight, met the wards as if they had known each other in another life. It turned a little and then more, the bolt withdrawing with a grudging cough. He stood a second just inside to let the darkness speak first, then found the switch and didn't use it. There is a kind of light that belongs to cellars and to people who use them. The space smelled of coal that hadn't been coal in years, and of floor polish not quite dry. A bicycle without a chain leaned against a wall. The floor at the bottom of the steps showed a recent scuff, almost a crescent, where someone had turned their heel and then corrected it with a rag. The correction was better than the scuff, which is how you knew a careful hand had done it. On a crate near the wall stood an old tumbler with a brown ring at the bottom, and beside it a square of newspaper folded once and then again, the crease still sharp. He touched the glass, cold, not wet. The paper had a date from March in its corner, the print faint where a thumb had gone over it many times. He didn't open the other storage doors. He had learned not to wake sleeping cupboards. He closed the cellar with the same small cough of bolt and let the key sit a moment in the lock before it came away, as if it had liked the place. Back under the arch, he slid the brass into his pocket again. If old keys travel, old locks are happy to pretend they remember. Upstairs, a step paused and then resumed. On the second landing, he met Mademoiselle Perrin with a parcel of dress cotton under her arm, the paper damp at the edges where the mist had licked it. She made room for him in the narrow space, that careful inward stoop again. "It smells of polish," she said, as if defending herself before he accused. "It does," he said. "You helped her?" "The concierge. She says the streaks show." "Her age," Perrin replied. "I told her they show the light." She glanced toward number 12. "She left her curtains open last night. I slept better for not seeing my own face on the glass." "Did you hear anything?" She shook her head. "I don't listen well when I am tired. It is my finest quality." The attempt at a smile touched her eyes and left no mark. "If he comes again, the man with the collar, I will tell you, not because I think he is bad, because the building doesn't like to be watched." He thanked her and let her go, listening to the small domestic sounds her door made. Latch, chain, the whisper a coat makes when it meets its hook. He put his hand against the wall where the wardrobe in number 12 had left its oval clean. The paint felt cooler there, almost as if the wall had been relieved of pressure. Later, when the street had lost interest in itself and the last of the bread had been sold, he went home by the long way and let the river put his thoughts in order. His wife had kept the stew warm as she said she would. He ate without telling the story, because stories told too soon forget to arrange themselves. The hotel key lay again on the saucer, and she reached to move it out of harm's way with the indifferent tenderness one uses for a spoon. "You were right about the glass and the curtains," he said. "I usually am," she replied, not boasting. "People put one thing away and then hide themselves with the other. It's like leaving a light on when you go out so the room thinks you're still there." He slept as he often did when a case was not quite a case. Deeply and too briefly, the mind-finishing conversations the day had been polite enough not to interrupt. In the morning, the rain had decided to be diligent. He reached the Quai des Orfèvres before the clock struck 9. The corridors smelled of wet coats and ink. Janvier came in with his hat held by its brim as if it might fail him. The Voyageur. "Proprietor remembered more," Janvier said, as if apologizing for remembering it at all. "There was a woman in February, he thinks February, who came to the lobby 2 or 3 mornings and did not take a room. She stood by the window and looked out toward the street. He noticed her because she didn't like the smell of the corridor either. He thought she was waiting for someone. He said she had a folded shopping bag in her hand, the kind old-fashioned women carry. Old-fashioned? His word, Janvier said. She wore gloves, dark coat, small hat that didn't try to be a hat. He thought her careful. He thought she might be a widow because she didn't look at people, only at a thing she had already decided to look at. Did he know her? No. He said she was not one of his. He thought... Janvier hesitated, made himself practical. He thought she looked at the baker's sign like someone taking a measurement. "At 9, Maigret said. "At 9, Janvier echoed. Villon kept the appointment as if he had always intended to. He came without making wet marks on the floor, which means he had walked slowly. In the interview room, he declined the chair at first, and then took it as a favor to the table. He put his hands flat on the wood and considered them, then looked up. "You wish to know names," he said. "I wish to know where to find you if looking becomes necessary," Maigret corrected. "So you sleep by the wall where the barges turn. You eat here and there. When you need to be someone who is not expected to pay, you are." "Legrand," Villon said. He almost smiled. "It is the name the wind chooses when it needs to fill. A form. And Carpentier." "He was sometimes Carpentier and sometimes nothing at all," Villon said. "He counted coins because they were the only things that stayed where you put them until someone else picked them up." He thought a moment. "He talked about lion. He said lion the way people say Sunday, as if it were clean. You saw him in room 4. I saw him wherever the table had room for 2 elbows. A pause, then. "Once a woman came to the door and did not cross it. She looked at the sign." He made a small gesture with his fingers, the size of a painted loaf. "She held a bag tightly, as if it might argue. She wore gloves too soon for spring. It was cold, but the gloves were for carefulness more than for cold." "When?" "The day after men came and asked me if I preferred my teeth in my mouth or in my pocket," he said evenly. "February. The proprietor had scoured the corridor. That morning with something that pretended to be lemon. It made the air lie. She did not close her eyes against it. She had closed her eyes before she came." "What did she want?" "To see whether looking could be enough," he said. "Sometimes it is." "Did Carpentier speak to her?" "No. He was gone. He always went when a thing became too much like a thing. He gave the names he had used when it had been useful. To have names. Legrand, sometimes Valerand. Once even the ridiculous Monsieur Paul, because a woman at a soup line had put it in his hand along with the bowl, and he had carried it for 2 days until it seemed dishonest to keep it. He told the corners of streets where he might be found, and the hour when the wind comes down off the canal and makes men move. He did not change the chair with restlessness or perform regret for the sake of decency. When he had finished being useful, he placed his palms flat again as if to show they were empty. "Do you want the key?" Maigret asked, laying it on the table between them. Villon looked at it the way a man looks at a photograph of a place that has since burned. "No," he said. "If it is near me, I will mistake it for permission." He lifted his eyes. "You will tell her that I am finished making that mistake." "When I have cause to speak to her again," Maigret said. "You will," Villon said. "The building likes you. It will tell you when it is ready." When he had gone, Janvier came back with a shrug. He had meant to leave at the door. "The Voyageur's man thinks the woman could be the widow," he said. "He won't swear. He said widows are like closed books. The covers are similar. Widows are like people, Maigret said and put on his coat again. They keep their place with a piece of ribbon and then cannot remember which page the ribbon marked. The rain was steady but small, as if the sky had no appetite. En route. Des Trois Frères, the concierge, had hung the feather duster to dry by a piece of blue string. She saw him and leaned out, eyes quick. She came down for milk, the concierge said, before he asked. She left the door open while she ran across. I could see the canary looking at the hall. Did the man come back? No, only his absence. It is a heavier thing than he is. Upstairs, Madame Leblanc opened as before, the chain unhooked after the small pause of someone deciding to trust for a quarter of a second. The room smelled of coffee and the starch of ironed curtains. The photographs on the mantel were where they had always been, but she had dusted them. The glass looked slightly too clean. I saw you yesterday, he said pleasantly, as if the fact itself were a kindness. I saw you, she said. It helps. He didn't take out the key. He didn't say the word hotel. He said, in February, did you have cause to be on the Rue Caulaincourt in the mornings? A beat. No. The Voyageurs is there. I have never been in a hotel in Paris, she said, exactly as she had said it before. The smallest ripple in the voice there and gone. Her eyes did not move from his. Of course, he said. I ask because a woman stood in their lobby some mornings and looked at the baker's sign as it swings from the other side. The concierge there thought she was waiting for the varnish in her flat to dry. I have no varnish, she said, almost with a laugh that hadn't practiced. Only wax. I put it too thick sometimes. And your gloves? My gloves are old, she said. They do not remember where they went. He nodded and let the air be ordinary again. The canary pecked at its seed. A piece fell and was not missed. On the skirting board behind the wardrobe, the oval would still be there. Even if she moved it, the place where it had been would carry its shape for a time. People and furniture share that habit. At the door he turned as if to ask something else and did not. On the landing, Mademoiselle Perrin's key turned softly. She glanced out, saw him, and almost smiled. On the stairs, Henri came up with the day's empty crate. Onions gone. The smell of them still making a map of the air. Outside, the baker wiped his sign with a cloth that left it wetter than before. The street was a view, and the view was a room someone had kept in their head until the angles were right. He went back under the arch to the cellar door and laid his fingers on the iron as one might touch a sleeping animal, not to wake it, only to be sure of it. Then he crossed to the cafe and took his place. The proprietor brought him coffee and stood as if to say something, and thought better of it. Have you ever been in a hotel lobby, monsieur? Maigret asked without looking up. Once, the man said. To complain about noise, it was too quiet. I preferred it when it was noisy. We often prefer what interrupts us, Maigret said. He looked through the window at the sign. At the lace of number 12, at the place where a man had stood in the hall listening like a boy at a rail. The wrong key had opened a cellar. The right question, perhaps, would open a morning in February. That refused to stay where it had been put. He would not hurry it. People confessed to silence before they confessed to policemen. The day had its work cut out, to align one life over another until the tracing matched or the hand shook. He would sit and let it. The rain turned to a fine net that you walked through without feeling it until your hat brim began to bead. From his table, Maigret watched the baker step out with a cloth and make a show of tending his painted loaf, as if the sign were a living thing that responded to care. There was no need for it. The cloth left the wood wetter. The baker went back. Inside, and a minute later, the bell above the shop door made that faint, tinny jump it made when someone with a steady hand opened it. He crossed over and stood a moment under the awning, watching the traffic of loaves and small coins, then stepped to the counter when the queue thinned. The baker was a compact man with the shoulders of someone who had chosen to be awake when others slept. Flour lived along the lines of his fingers. You keep the sign because it is yours? Maigret asked, not quite a question. I keep it because people know where they are when they see it, the baker said. He glanced toward the street. And because it creaks when the wind changes. His eyes flicked back to the inspector's lapel and found what they expected there. Monsieur wants information, Maigret said mildly, and a small brioche to justify it. The man nodded, cut the piece, wrapped it, and then stood with his hand on the counter. In February, Maigret said, Mornings a little before 9. Did you notice a woman across the way in the hotel lobby? I noticed a woman who looked past me, the baker said. His mouth softened at the corners. She had gloves, old ones, good leather ones. She carried a folded bag in her hand like it might fly away if she let it. She didn't buy bread here. She stood a few minutes and then went. She didn't have the look of someone waiting to meet anyone. She had the look of someone who had already met a thing and wanted to see if it was still what she remembered. You know her? I have seen her face with a loaf in a paper once or twice. She lives up the hill. She says good morning the way careful people do, with the head more than with the mouth. He turned a loaf in his hands, set it down. The sign hangs true, he added, as if offering proof. From that lobby, it lines with the cornice of the yellow house. Some people like straight lines. Back on the pavement, Maigret broke the brioche and ate it slowly, letting the butter sit on his tongue a second before it went. The picture held a woman in gloves too soon for spring, letting a folded bag provide purpose while she watched a piece of wood tell her whether a memory had kept its place. He looked up toward number 12. The lace was still open. He walked on and made a note to himself that had no words in it. At the Quai des Orfèvres, the corridors were their winter selves even in rain, the smell of ink, of bodies drying in wool. Longyon appeared in the doorway like a cloud that had decided to wear a hat. It's only a key, he said, already in disagreement with whatever outcome might not be the correct one. If it were mine, I would have thrown it in the river and written a report to say I had done so. You would have been right, Maigret said, and wrong. Both are common, Longyon replied with satisfaction. Do you want help not finding anything? He took out a damp notebook, held it at a distance, and squinted. Or should I go and ask the baker if his sign has been committing crimes? Ask him if he knows when the wind changes, Maigret said without looking up. Longyon snorted as if this answer confirmed his lowest estimate of human nature, and went away to be indignant elsewhere. Near noon, he took the longer way home, not to eat, but to sit at the kitchen table with his wife's quiet. The pot on the back burner made a small shivering sound. The window had a band of steam along its lower edge. He set the hotel key on the saucer as before and told her about gloves and a folded bag and a sign that had learned the trick of lining. Up with a cornice to make a room in a head. A folded bag is something you can hold without having to fill it, she said, wiping her hands. You can go out and be a person who is going somewhere, even if you are only going to stand. And gloves. Gloves are for making sure you leave no mark, she said, tying up an apron. Sometimes people worry about leaving fingerprints. On their own thoughts. If you don't touch anything, the thought won't stick, you see. If it doesn't stick, you don't have to wash it off. He looked at the key. The cellar opened for it, he said. Old things greet old things, she said. And cellars are where people put the parts of their house they don't want to meet every day. People have cellars of that kind too. On the way back to Montmartre, a truck sprayed the street with a freshness that was only water finding old. Dirt to lift. He went first to the building and stood under the arch long enough for the concierge to decide she might have remembered something. In March, she said, I had the floor polish with the lemon on it because the other had run out. I hated it until I liked it. It made the corridors dishonest. Do you remember anyone being in the cellar? Everyone is in the cellar the week the rents come due, she said with a practical tilt of the chin. They put away things. They might have to sell and then take them out again when they decide not to sell, but she frowned, then brightened at her own remembering. There was a night when a door was closed that should have stood open. I left the window on, the landing ajar to clear the smell of polish. When I went down to fetch the broom, the cellar door gave me a push back. Someone was behind it near the bottom of the steps. I spoke. No one answered. I went to fetch my husband's walking stick, though he has been gone 8 years and the stick knows it. When I came back, the door was as it should be. A glass was on the crate. I scolded the glass and carried on. Which night? The night after I saw the woman from number 12 come in with her gloves not wet though it was raining, she said, pleased at this neat rhyme. She had gone out with no bag and come back with one folded. It was the lemon week. I remember because the smell made my head argue with itself. He climbed to the second floor, not to knock, but to breathe the landing air that always kept a little dust like a secret. On the sill, a crescent of grey had settled where smoke tries to imitate fog and fails. He touched it, and his finger came away clean. Time had finished that clue. Across the landing, Mademoiselle Perrin opened before he could decide to go on. She had a box of buttons in her hand that clicked like a small rain. "I am going to the dressmaker," she said, as if confessing a crime. "If someone asks me what I buy, I will say thread. It is the answer that puts people back into their heads. Did you notice a night when the cellar door did not want witnesses?" "I notice mornings," she said. "At night, I am good at not being awake. In the morning in March," she held up the button box as if it might be a calendar, "I smelled wine that wasn't wine and polish that was trying to be lemon. The smell of trying is strong. And Henri?" She made a small face, not unkind, not hopeful. "He tries to be older in the evenings and younger in the mornings. It is as though he counts backward without telling his feet." Henri came up, as if having been summoned by the mention. He carried nothing this time. The absence of the crate looked like a relief to his arm. "You have a way with the cellar?" Maigret asked. "I have a way with the concierge," Henri said, grinning without heat. "She tells me the Polish is better when a young back does the work." "You were out late in March some nights." "I am out late many nights. March is a month like others when you work evenings." He stopped, looked as if he had lost a coin he was not sure he had had. "There was a night I sat a while on the steps when I came in. I didn't want to wake anyone. Someone was in the cellar, I think. I heard the glass make a sound like a glass and then not. I don't listen well when I'm tired either," he added, echoing the seamstress without knowing it. In the cafe, the proprietor wiped as if he could polish the day into behaving. He set coffee down without asking and stood with the towel under his arm. "The woman," he said, as if continuing a conversation they had not had. "She came twice last week. Small, careful, dark coat. Looks at the sign and then at her hands, as if she had borrowed them and must return them in good order. She sits for a minute and says she has forgotten something and leaves." "She said what she forgot?" Maigret asked. "People don't tell me what they forget," the man said with humor as dry as his towel. "If they did, I would have to keep it behind the bar and charge a deposit." In the afternoon, a brightness passed through the rain the way a thought passes through a room. It left nothing and everything a fraction clearer. He saw her then, on the opposite pavement, the folded bag in her hand more like a habit than an object. She went into the cafe as if going into a small chapel where no one expects you to kneel. She sat at a table that did not quite line with the window and turned to correct it with a tiny movement of her chair. She did not take off her gloves. He did not rise. He watched the angle from where he was, made the measurement in his head. From here, the baker's sign would rest against the cornice of the yellow house in precisely the way that room 4 had trained it to. She sat 5 minutes. Her eyes did not flicker. When the proprietor came with a glass of water, she smiled the way careful people smile at someone who has remembered to be kind. Then she stood, as if she had achieved the thing she had come to try, and left, the folded bag unaltered. He waited a minute more and crossed after her, not to stop her in the street, but to reach the door at number 12 when she reached it. She saw him with the resigned courage of someone who knows what conversation is for and has no energy left to want the other kind. "I was buying thread," she said without conviction. "You will need it," he said gently. "When you pull at a hem, something has to hold." He did not follow her up. He let the sentence find its own use as she climbed. He went instead to the lodge. "In February," he said to the concierge again, "after lemon, the cellar glass." "It was on the crate," she said. "I washed it and put it back because it was not mine to throw away." "You are right," he said. "Some things must be returned to their place before they can be forgotten." Toward evening, the light thickened. The sign made its predictable small creak. He sat, as he always did, with his back to the wall and the street in front of him, and thought about gloves and bags, and a glass that had made a sound like a glass in the dark. He thought about a woman measuring a view until it matched a room that had never been hers, and yet had been the place where something had kept still long enough to be looked at. He thought about a man who did not keep things that ran out, and another who counted coins to convince the table they mattered. When he went up to number 12 at last, he did not knock at once. He stood with his ear not to the wood but to the air, which keeps its own ledger of small movements. He heard the canary settle. He heard the whisper of cloth, a drawer that asked permission before it opened, and then was very sure of itself. He knocked then, and when she opened, she had the gloves in one hand, not on it. The folded bag sat on the table like a word someone meant to say and had left for later. "I have never been in a hotel in Paris," she said again, before he could speak. "You have been in a lobby," he said so softly that the sentence could have been a suggestion. "You went 3 mornings because a man who counted coins and called himself something he wasn't sat in room 4, and when he left, the view did not leave with him. You came to see if it would be enough. In March you came home and stood in your cellar because a key that did not belong to you opened a door that did not know the difference. You drank a little to make the air honest. You rinsed the glass and left it because it was not yours." She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been caught up by a current that is not dangerous and does not promise land either. "I wanted," she said, and looked at the folded bag as if the bag might complete the sentence for her. "I wanted to put something back where it had been, the month, the hour, the sign." Her voice was steady, as if she were describing the steps of a recipe. "My husband," she said, and stopped, not because she did not know the word that came next, but because all the words came at once. "He liked his own bed," Maigret said, rescuing her from the pile. "He did not care for corridors that smelled of lemon pretending to be something else." She nodded helplessly. "He did not go to hotels," she said, "so I went to see what a place was for when it wasn't for him." "It is foolish. It is human," he said. "And the key?" she asked, sudden and practical. "Everyone speaks of the key." "It left one life and looked for another," he said. "It found a door that said nothing. That was almost the same as yes." She sat then as if the chair had reached up and taken the weight from her knees. The gloves lay on the table between them, like 2 animals that had fallen asleep. The canary made a small noise that could have been approval. "I will leave." "The curtains open?" she said finally, in a voice that had decided nothing and yet had the calm of decision. "If he comes to listen, he will hear my house and not the room he lost." He inclined his head. The street had begun to shine. Somewhere down the hill, a boy kicked at a piece of paper and missed it. He closed the door behind him and went down. Past the window left a finger's width open to let the building breathe. In the lodge, the concierge looked at him with the hope of someone waiting to be told that what she had suspected was sufficient. "People have their uses for cellars," he said, "and for signs." She nodded, as if he had said something complicated. The evening would go on and arrange itself without incident, or with the kind of incident that resembles someone remembering to bring in a plant from the window-sill before the cold. He sat again at his table and did not light his pipe. The next small thing would be along in its own time, and when it came it would not be proof. It would be consent. Morning came with a pallor that made the street look as if someone had erased and redrawn it in softer pencil. The baker's sign creaked once and then held its tongue. The awning dripped steadily at its usual places. Maigret took his coffee early, not because anything would happen more quickly for being watched, but because the hour before the shops truly woke had a way of telling the day what tone to use. The concierge swept, stopped, listened to the broom and swept again. In number 12 the lace remained open. The canary had the forward-leaning aspect of small things that expect something and would be satisfied with anything. He walked as far as the corner and back, then crossed to the Hôtel des Voyageurs. The proprietor had found a woolen cardigan whose age was a statement of principle, and wore it with affronted dignity. "You remember much, for a man who dislikes remembering," Maigret said lightly. "I remember what the corridor tells me," the man replied. "It has no reason to lie. Yesterday I told your Janvier about the woman who looked without coming in. Today I remember that the man who called himself Carpentier asked a foolish question. He asked if there was a widow on the street with the baker's sign. I told him there are always widows and always signs." "When did he ask?" "In February, when you felt you could smell the bones of winter," the proprietor said, pleased with the sentence as it left him. "He sat where the sign lines with the cornice. He liked his coffee burned. He counted coins and put them away again, as if hiding the evidence from the table. He pulled at a ledger that had begun to take on the shape of the drawer that held it. He left in March. The day it rained as if it had been saving up for years. He paid, which is more than some do." "Did he receive letters?" Maigret asked. From the widow. The man shook his head. He did not keep things that require answers. He let the lobby keep the view for him. He kept nothing else. Back on the pavement, Maigret let the air sit on his face. The day before, Villon had said the canal teaches you to move when bumped. A man can bump a thought the same way. Carpentier asking after a widow asking a sign to hold still. Between those two, a room that had been useful to both and belonged to neither. On Rue des Trois Frères, a ladder stood against the baker's awning. The compact man came out with a wrench and a tin of oil and looked up at his painted loaf as a father looks at a boy who has to be convinced to wash behind his ears. It creaks on a south wind, he explained, not because he owed anyone an explanation, but because the act needed a comment. My wife says the noise goes into her dreams and rearranges the furniture. He loosened the nut, put a drop of oil, tested the swing. The sign gave a darker sound, more like the hinge of a memory than a complaint. For a moment he lifted it off its bracket altogether and held it in his hands. The gap it left was the exact shape of something that used to be there. Across the street, a woman had paused without meaning to. She stood with the folded bag in her hand and did nothing with her face. Then she moved on. The baker put the loaf back, wiped his hands, and stepped down. When he saw Maigret watching, he nodded once. A craftsman's nod, acknowledging a thing done properly. In the café, the proprietor had set out 2 glasses, as if expecting company he did not trust to arrive at the same time. Lognon came in like weather, left a remark about the futility of oil against time, and retreated with a newspaper that he would read for evidence of humanity's bad habits. Janvier arrived on the minute he had said, eyes bright with the warmth of walking uphill. The voyageurs man told you about Carpentier and widows, Janvier said. Not a question. He told me, Maigret said. He was proud of his precision. It costs him nothing to be accurate about other people's lives. What do we do with it? We let the people whose lives they are decide whether to line things up, Maigret said. He stood, left coins, and crossed to number 12. Madame Leblanc opened without the little pause for the chain. The room had a fresh lemon smell that came from no lemon. She had done the morning work earlier. The gloves were not on the table. The folded bag had been put away or replaced with another folded bag indistinguishable from it. She looked more rested and more fragile for it, like porcelain after a careful wash. In February, he said, as if continuing an old talk, a man asked at the hotel about a widow on this street. He called himself Carpentier. He counted coins because the table made him feel poor if he did not. You went to the lobby to measure a view against a piece of your life. It is possible you measured him too. She watched him the way one watches a child cross a wet pavement, alert without showing it, ready to reach without alarming. He worked at my husband's oven when he was a boy, she said after a moment that seemed to take something from her throat and give it back. He was quick with his hands and bored with dough. When the war came, he changed his name twice before he changed it back. He came to see me when my husband died, not to be kind, but because he thought there might be money. I gave him some. You expect that? How many times? Maigret's voice did not move. Twice, she said. Small amounts the first time. Enough the second time that I sat afterward with my hand on the table because it was heavy from the empty. He said he would pay me when Lion made him honest. In February I thought he might try to be honest, or that he might need more to help him try. I went to the hotel because I wanted to see which it would be before I made a decision. He looked at the sign and did not see me. That was the decision. Did he come here? Maigret asked. No. She stood very still, as if the word were a fragile object. I would not have opened. The cellar. He let the word go into the room without touching anything. I went down because the smell upstairs told me I was a person who had just given away more than she had, she said, with that same deliberate simplicity. I didn't want the canary to see my face. I took the glass, I poured a little. I stood on the 3rd step where cold reaches your feet even in summer. It tasted of the cellar, which is to say of things not wanted today. I rinsed the glass, because you always rinse a glass. Then I left it because it was not mine. The door is heavy, it likes to push back. Hand the key in the door yesterday, he said gently, as if placing a piece on a board where it would not be knocked. I thought it was his for a second, she said, not with sense. with the part of me that hears his footfall in any slow step. When I saw the shape, I knew it was nothing, but the fear had already put its chair at my table. "It was a hotel key," he said. "Another man's. He won't touch your door again." "I know," she said in a tone that was nearly irritation, as if anger might be the only affordable luxury left to her. Then she softened. At the hotel, on the last morning, he stood and put the coins away slowly, like someone who wants to convince himself the movement will buy him dignity. He looked as if he had decided to leave the city by telling himself he was going towards something. I watched him go and found that the sign had moved a little with the wind. It did not line with the cornice anymore. I thought perhaps that was enough. She sat and folded her hands as if counting them. "There is no crime," she said, almost pleading. "There is only the foolishness of women who keep money in a box and think it is safer than in a bank because their hands know the box. There is loneliness," he said, "and habit, and the way a piece of wood can become a certainty if you look at it long enough from the same table. Do you intend to find him?" she asked. "If I find him without intending to, I will ask him if Lion made him honest," he said. "If not, I will remember that men who count coins for the sake of a table often leave by water." He stood. "You will keep the curtains, as you choose." "As I choose," she repeated, and for the first time there was a hint of something like ownership in her voice. On the landing he met Mademoiselle Perrin with a reel of thread too small to justify her careful way of carrying. She made a face at herself and then at him. "I bought the thing one says one buys," she confessed. "It holds hems as well as any other," he said. "The sign is quieter today." "They took it down," she said. "I stopped without stopping." "It's back," he replied. The gap it left was enough. She looked him full in the face then, as if surprised to find the courage. "She is kinder than I am," she said of her neighbor almost angrily. "I would have shut the curtains and let the sign lie." "Kinder," he said, "and more stubborn." Downstairs, the concierge had arranged her ledger at a slight angle, the way she liked to test a new order of things. At the cafe, the proprietor poured without being asked, as if the pipe not being lit required compensation. The baker's sign made its new, darker sound at a truck's passing. A man in a brown coat paused to light a cigarette, and then decided not to. His hands did not like being seen doing it. In the afternoon, Villon appeared at the door of the cafe and stood a second, letting the room recognize him. He came to the table as if there had always been a chair for him there. "She will leave her curtains open," he said, gazing at the window instead of at Maigret. I could hear it in the way the chain sounded when she took it off. Chains have sounds when they expect to be used or not used. You learn that on barges. "You will leave her door alone," Maigret said. "I told you," Villon replied mildly. "It was a mistake to bring a memory to someone who keeps her house like that. The house has enough work without mine." He paused. "The key. You will give it back to the man who thinks it was always his." "I will give it to the man who will polish it and then lose interest," Maigret said. "That is a kind of burial," Villon said approvingly. He turned his gaze to the sign. "They oiled it. It has a different voice. The old voice would have told me if the wind came from the right direction. I will have to learn the new one." He left with the unhurried step of a man who has accepted his pace from a tutor he doesn't intend to argue with. Maigret watched the street return itself to the afternoon. Janvier came by and leaned on the back of the chair. "So," Janvier said, "because it is sometimes necessary to announce a conclusion before you know it." So, Maigret repeated, not as a challenge but as an agreement to a pause. "We will write nothing today that requires ink." "No theft," Janvier said, almost disappointed. "No," Maigret said, "only a small relocation of a key that wanted a pocket, a glass that wanted rinsing, a sign that wanted oil, and a woman who wanted to see if looking at a view could be enough to pay a debt, only she had charged herself." Janvier shifted, checked his watch, as if out of loyalty to the idea of duty. "And if Carpentier comes back?" "He will come back to a city that has already decided where to put him," Maigret said. "He will find that room 4 is a different lock. He will find that the widow buys thread instead of lending money. He will find that the sign's voice has changed." He smiled, a small one. Men who think they can return by aligning angles learn about oil. The bells of a church up the hill counted a quarter hour and then regretted it. They sounded like spoons against a chipped bowl. A woman with damp hair hurried past, late for something that would forgive her. In number 12, the lace trembled and settled. You could tell the curtains were going to remain open. The canary turned once on its perch and faced the street. The day let go a little of the tightness it had kept for itself. There would be one more small thing, Maigret knew, a movement like a sigh finding its place. And then perhaps he would think of the cinema, and of a night when rain could be heard on a different awning, and the work of doors could be left to doors. The day moved forward a notch without announcing it. Somewhere up the hill a clock struck. The hour, and then, as if suddenly shy, decided not to insist. The baker's sign tested its new voice and seemed to approve. Maigret sat with his back to the wall and his hands around a cup that had stopped giving heat, the pipe beside it like a promise he did not intend to keep. The street had the look of a sentence waiting for its verb. Janvier returned from a small errand not important enough to be called a task. He took off his hat and set it brim down on the chair, as if it might prefer to rest that way. The proprietor at the Voyageuse had a notion, he said. He keeps remembering things he's proud not to have forgotten. A man came in this morning. Didn't take a room, asked if the coffee could be burned, asked if room 4 was free as if the number were a habit. The proprietor said no to both. The man counted coins while standing and then left. Lion on his tongue? Maigret asked. Like a place he keeps his courage, Janvier said. He walked downhill. If he keeps walking, he reaches the canal. They let that sit. There are some sentences you fold and put away until you need them. Outside, the concierge made a show of adjusting the mat under the arch. It was already adjusted. She had noticed the same small change in the day and had decided to give it something to do. Stay here, Maigret said, not as an order but as an arrangement. He crossed to the Voyageurs by the long diagonal that took in the baker and the yellow house, and the way the sign sat properly now. Inside the lobby, the air had the familiar varnish of old polish, and a persistence of coffee that belonged more to cups than to beans. The proprietor lifted his chin without moving anything else. He was here, the man said, pleased to be able to say it again. Thin coat, good shoes gone bad? He asked after a widow as if it were a category. He put his coins in a little row and then in another. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He looked at the sign through the glass. Where did he go? He went out and forgot to take the heat with him, the proprietor said. You'll find him where men ask water for an opinion. On the street, the rain had the transparency of indecision. Maigret did not hurry. He crossed back, took his place, let Janvier sit and failed to disguise his wish to be moving. The café door opened for men who were always coming in at that hour, and then for one who was not. He had the look Paris gives its faithful, a thinning at the cheeks, a greyness at the temples that could be dirt or grief or nothing at all. His coat had taken on rain and given none back. He came to the counter, asked for coffee, and then said almost apologetically, "Burn it if you can." The proprietor, who disliked the request on principle, made the coffee he made and set it down without comment. The man didn't object. He turned, scanned the room without curiosity, and chose a table you would have chosen if you had learned to see a view before you saw a chair. He put his coins in a row, then a column, as if to teach them manners. He was not young and not yet done pretending to be. Maigret rose only when the first coin had been moved twice. He stood at the table and said the name that belonged to the coat he saw. Carpentier. The man looked up with a small relief that had nothing to do with being recognized, and everything to do with not having to decide what to call himself. "Inspector," he said, making the word a courtesy, "you've been waiting at the wrong table." "I've been waiting at every table," Maigret said, and sat. He did not offer a cigarette. Carpentier would have refused, and then regretted refusing, and then smoked. It was kinder to let him miss nothing. "You know the room," Carpentier said, looking toward the window, not for the sign but for the piece of sky that explained the sign's behavior. "You know the kind of morning when the cornice and the loaf make a straight line. You know the kind of other morning." "I know a lobby," Maigret said, "and a woman who stood in it with gloves too early for spring." Carpentier's hand stopped moving a coin for a fraction of a second, then finished the movement as if it had not been interrupted. "Widows aren't spring," he said. They are a month with no date. He took a sip of coffee and let the bitterness be a fact. She keeps a house you could cut bread on. Once, when I was a boy, her husband sent me home because he said I counted my dough as if it were money. He was right. Dough insults a boy when it won't rise for him. Money at least stays flat. You asked after her here, Maigret said. In February. I asked after the word widow, Carpentier said gently, not arguing. The proprietor gave me a sermon. I have had better sermons from the smell of polish. He made a small smile for himself. I looked from here. It was enough. I told myself it was enough. And then you went away. Everyone goes away, he said. You either go in your body or you go in your expectation. I have gone both ways. He turned a coin on its edge and let it fall. It didn't quite stand and didn't quite lie. Sometimes I say lion because it is easier to leave a city if you offer it a respectable destination. You left debts, Maigret said, only to see how the word sat. I took a loan, Carpentier corrected, polite to the point of insolence. She held out her hand. I took what was there and promised to put something back in it. Promises are the currency in some houses. I spent mine poorly. He met Maigret's gaze for the first time. There is no law for that. There is. None, Maigret agreed. There is only weather. Carpentier nodded as if weather were a vocabulary they shared. I went down by the canal, he said. There is a wall that takes care of men who have run out of other kinds of care. I learned a new noise for the baker's sign today. They oiled it. The old noise told me when I was in the right place. The new noise tells me I am late. You are late, Maigret said with no emphasis. She no longer keeps a box on the table for you. The box was never for me, Carpentier said. It was for the person she was when she could still be pleased by the weight of it. I am only away for a box to discover its use. He pushed the coins together, not counting them so much as grouping them for warmth. I will not trouble her. I have learned that some curtains are a kind of door. She keeps them open, Maigret said. He absorbed that and allowed himself the smallest, truest flinch Maigret had seen on his face. Open, he repeated, and the word made something vertical inside him. Then she has ceased waiting. That is the kindest thing you can say about a person who has waited. He lifted his coffee, tasted, set it down. I will finish this, and then allow the canal to choose me. I won't drown, he added, almost cheerful. It is a different kind of choice. Do you still have a key, Maigret asked. To any door. Carpentier shook his head. I leave keys where they are happiest. Some belong to rooms, some belong to pockets. I am not a good pocket. He looked at the table, at the coins that had been arranged too many ways. Do you wish me to give a statement, Inspector? There are pens for that. I can tell you that I repaid nothing and intend to repay less. It would make a tidy piece of paper. There is no paper, Maigret said. Only a morning in February and a glance through a lobby and a woman who can sleep with the curtains open. He stood. Drink your coffee. Carpentier did. He did not look toward number 12. When he left, he put the coins exact on the saucer and aligned it with the edge of the table as if the gesture were a way of keeping faith with objects. At the door he paused, listening. The sign spoke in its new tone. He nodded to it as to an acquaintance who had changed his hat and gone thinner in the face. Then he went, choosing a pace that would not make his shoes speak louder than he did. Janvier watched him reach the corner. We could follow, he said without conviction. We could, Maigret said. We will not. He put his coat on. We will go upstairs. Number 12 opened on the second knock. The canary turned its head and then turned it back again. Deciding its interest could be satisfied later. Madame Leblanc wore a dark cardigan and the sort of calm that costs more than a cardigan. She looked at Maigret's face and did not ask for the news in it. He was at the hotel, Maigret said. He asked the coffee to be burned. He moved coins and then stopped. She exhaled, but not relief, something more like the acceptance a house makes when it sits down on its foundations after a small settling. I have put the box in the wardrobe, she said. Not hidden, put away. I folded the bag on top of it so it will not rattle when I open the door for other reasons. You will not need the cellar, Maigret said. No, she agreed. The lemon is gone. The smell of wax is honest again. She touched the back of a chair with 2 fingers, an absent caress that belonged to the wood as much as to her. "He won't come," she added, and made of it neither a hope nor a fear. "He will not," Maigret said. "He has learned a new noise for the sign, and it does not tell him to stop." She nodded once. "Will you have coffee?" she asked, and it was not hospitality so much as an offer to give the room something to do. "Another time," he said, "because another time is a gift one gives to rooms." He stood a moment longer, not to inspect anything, but to let the quiet do its work. "Leave the curtains as you like," he said. "People imagine they're for the neighbors, they're for ourselves." On the landing, Mademoiselle Perrin was fitting a button with small, precise bites of thread, the reel tucked in her palm. She glanced up and made a face that was her attempt at conspiratorial cheer. "It will hold," she said of the button. She meant other things. "It will," Maigret said. Downstairs, the concierge had her ledger open at a page where nothing had yet been written. She looked at him as if expecting a dictation. "The sign sounds different," she ventured. "It does," he said. "We will get used to it." He crossed back to the café. The proprietor set his cup down with the satisfaction of someone re-establishing a pattern. Lognon wandered in, damp at the brim, and stood like a reproach to the very idea of days that go on being themselves. "Anything?" he asked, already rehearsing his disappointment. "A key found a place not to be used," Maigret said. "A widow decided which way her curtains hang. A man listened to a new hinge and chose a wall over a door. The baker will sleep better." Lognon made the noise men make when denied the story they told themselves they didn't want. "I'll write it up as nothing," he said. "Write it up as nothing carefully," Maigret replied, and the corner of Lognon's mouth conceded a victory to language. By late afternoon, the rain had chosen to be rain and not mist. The awning collected it and then let it go in neat fringes. The sign spoke as trucks went past. The voice was lower, now less querulous, as if it had accepted its own maintenance. In number 12, the lace let the light in without telling secrets. Across from it, a chair waited in the café with the air of a place that would be the same tomorrow and the next day, and had no reason to be ashamed of it. He thought of the cinema he had promised, and of the way his wife would put on her coat, with that small economy of movement that made every gesture look chosen. He would suggest it tonight. They would walk under a different awning and listen to a different hinge. The city would be the same and not the same. He did not light his pipe. He let the day finish its own sentence. The afternoon thinned itself into a color that didn't choose between gray and the brown of wet wood. The sign across the way spoke in its new tone each time a truck shouldered past, no longer complaining, merely acknowledging. Maigret finished his coffee and stood, the chair making a small sound that belonged to that chair and no other. He crossed the street without looking left or right and took the hill by the gentler slope, as if the incline were a person whose pride you did not want to bruise. He went first to the locksmith. The little shop smelled of filings and old tobacco. The glass case held a congregation of keys that seemed to have been in conversation for several years. The man with the mustaches glanced up and down again, and then up once more, the way men look when their work interrupts what they tell themselves they are not doing, waiting. "You were right," Maigret said, laying the brass with its scratched 4 on the counter, a key that travelled longer than the room. The locksmith took it as a priest takes a small relic without believing or disbelieving. He turned it, read the nicks as if they were a date. "It has found its retirement," he said. "I have a drawer for those who have done their service." He opened a wooden tray, and there they were, the orphans and veterans, the duplicates of places that no longer existed, the old servants like this one that had been asked too many times to remember. He fitted the key among them with a care that was not sentiment, closed the drawer, and looked pleased with the sense of things returning to their proper category. "It will not be missed," he added, "not by the door that did not know it, and not by the pocket that lost it." On the way down again, the rain found its appetite. He paused under the awning at the baker's. The compact man nodded as if acknowledging a shared trade in things that rise and things that fall. The sign took the weather's opinion and answered in its oil-dark voice. In the lodge, the concierge had angled her ledger exactly so and was pretending to correct a column that had not erred. She looked up with The open curiosity reserved for policemen who have become furniture for a short time. "It is done," Maigret said. "What is?" she demanded. "Cross that endings could be announced without the list that justified them." "The part that belongs to doors," he said. "The rest belongs to people." She sniffed, forgiven. "The lady will sleep," she said, as if that had been the investigation's assignment. On the second-floor landing, Mademoiselle Perrin's door opened a hand's breadth and then fully. She had thread on her finger like the promise of work. "It will hold," she said again, but this time the smile reached her mouth. Across from her, number 12's lace was open, as if it had never learned another habit. When he knocked, the chain did not whisper before being unhooked. It simply wasn't there between his knuckles and the room. Madame Leblanc had a kettle just off the boil, and the gentle composure of someone who had arranged the day into usable pieces. The gloves were not in view. The folded bag had been replaced with a small vase, empty but with the air of something that would receive flowers, even if none presented themselves. "I saw him pass," she said. "Not a question, not a claim. He didn't look. He found—" "The hinge had changed its voice," Maigret said. "It told him to keep walking." She breathed out and didn't call it relief. "It is work to leave the curtains where they are," she said, almost apologizing. "It is good work," he answered, and took his leave before the room had to prove anything more. At the café, Janvier was dressing a cigarette with the fussy care that means a man has decided not to smoke it. He went toward the canal, he said. "I did not follow him because I remembered you telling me not to. I did not follow him because I am young enough still to argue with myself." "You did right both ways," Maigret said, and watched the smoke that never quite existed vanish into the notion of rain. Lognon arrived with a posture that complained of the weather and of people who pretend not to mind it. "Is there something to put on paper so that paper may feel useful?" he asked. "Put that nothing happened," Maigret said. "That a key returned to its drawer, that a sign accepted its oil, that a woman decided which way her curtains hang, that a man measured his coins one last time and then left them to a saucer." "Phil," Lognon said, satisfied to be exact about inconsequence. He took out his pencil with the air of someone who intends to be fair even to facts that refuse to cooperate. By late day, the street had chosen to be itself entirely. Henri came up the hill with a crate that did not ask his arm to prove anything. He nodded to the concierge, who nodded back without scolding him for what he had not done. Mademoiselle Perrin locked her door and set off with a box under her arm. That clicked like rain on a tin awning. She did not look across the landing before she turned the key. The baker brought the sign in half a finger's breadth for the night, so that the alarms of darkness could find their footing. There was a last thing to do, and it was not an act so much as a courtesy. He walked as far as the stone where the wall meets the canal, and the wind learns to go around people instead of through them. Villon was there with his collar up, looking like a piece of the wall that had learned to move. He didn't start when Maigret appeared, which is a kind of politeness. "They took the key," Maigret said. "Good," said Villon. "Keys like to be with their own. I am not my own anymore, it is fair." "You are your step," Maigret said. "It told her you were there, and now it will tell her you are not." "I will walk like other men again," Villon said, but without belief. He had learned his pace from water and would keep it. They stood a minute with the barges turning soundlessly in the wet, which is to say with great noise one learned not to hear. "She left the curtains open," Maigret added after a time. "I know," Villon said, as if he had been told by a voice only he could hear. "It is a good choice. Curtains are for the person who draws them, not for the opposite house. People forget that and are unhappy without knowing why." When he went back, the light in number 12 had begun to make a square on the lace. The canary had turned its head toward the quiet that rooms keep after certain sentences have been spoken inside them. He took his place in the café and let the clock choose when to speak. Janvier went to telephone the quai with a report that would give the day the ending it deserved, a tidy nothing carefully written. Lognon stood under the door to prevent rain from entering with the customers, a gesture he would have admired in others and distrusted in himself. The city arranged at dusk without incident. He thought of the drawer of old keys and how full it must be. Lives that had let themselves be convinced by metal. Lives that had traded one door for a wall and had expected to be forgiven for it. He thought of how often a piece of wood, set to swing from a bracket, acquires a voice that people use to tell themselves which way to turn. He thought of his wife saying rooms do not stop existing. People stop going back to them. She had been right. People kept the habit of a room as if it were a prayer, and then let it go not by turning away but by not turning back. He finished the coffee he was not tasting and went out into a rain that had settled on a pattern. On Boulevard Richard Lenoir. The trees made their wet sounds against the windows, and housewives counted not money but minutes. He climbed the stairs he knew and opened the door into warmth. His wife looked up from her knitting with the mild amusement of someone who can tell a day's weather from the way a coat is holding itself. "The cinema?" he said. "At last," she said, with the satisfaction of having been remembered exactly when she had stopped needing to be. She set the needles down. "Something light. We have given the heavy things to other rooms today." They walked out with the ease of people who know the city will step aside for them if they ask it without words. The rain tapped the umbrella, like a neighbor who knows you and wants only to borrow salt. They chose a theater where the poster had women with hats and men with hands that knew where to be. He bought 2 tickets, feeling the coins lie still without wanting to be counted for anyone's dignity. In the darkness, the seats accepted them. On the screen, the doors were made to open on cue. After, when the wet air met their faces again, he reached for his pipe. He filled it and did not light it. The habit of not disturbing the rain had become part of his courtesy to the evening. Across the river, the lamps made their little islands. His step matched his wife's, and the city's breath evened out. Tomorrow there would be papers to sign with words like, "No further action," a report with white spaces in exactly the right places, a lunch he would miss and not mind missing. The street with the sign would wake and spend itself as it always had. In number 12, the lace would let daylight in. The canary would take up its modest duty of being alive. The drawer at the locksmith's would keep its quiet congregation of metals that had been permission once and had become memory. He thought, not for the first time and not with surprise, that most of his work lived in these human adjustments. A hinge oiled so a sound would tell the right story, a habit restored to its owner, a door left to do the work of a door without having to become a verdict. He had waited, watched, listened. The people had revealed themselves by not being asked to do more than they could. On the way home, they stopped for bread. The baker's sign, damp and newly articulate, made its lower sound, and he heard in it the simple remark of a city that knows the work of staying itself. He smiled, because the remark was enough. He had no reply to give it, and none was required. He put the loaf under his arm, and together they went in.